This video was created by VinylicPuma of VinylicPumaGaming.
So a little while back, I made a video discussing my thoughts on the Brotherhood of Steel and what made them evil during the events of Fallout 4. Now today, I figured I would ultimately make a video that's more sympathetic of the Brotherhood of Steel's position, as well as delve into what the Commonwealth would be like if the Brotherhood ending was Fallout 4's canonical ending. Now, upon making the first video, there are a couple of things that I didn't actually take into account. For example, it's actually possible to not kill VIRGIL, whether you actually decide to lie to Captain Kells and say he's already dead, or you can convince the Brotherhood of Steel to keep him alive once he's returned to his human form. And after all, the ability to counteract FEV would be of particular use to the Brotherhood of Steel. My argument for why the Brotherhood of Steel was evil was mostly because most companion NPCs don't like them, and because the Brotherhood are ultimately capable of committing atrocities. It's interesting that the vast majority of companions, with the exception of Paladin Danse, along with Codsworth and Curie, dislike it when you join the Brotherhood of Steel. Whether you like Fallout 4's new morality system or not, it's interesting how much of your own companions' opinions can warp your own perspective as to what the good and bad actions are within the game. And depending on how you look at it, the Brotherhood hasn't really changed all that much since the first game in the franchise. While they do recruit Wastelanders now, they ultimately stand firm on collecting technology and wiping out post-war abominations in the Wasteland. Mostly of the feral ghoul, synth, super mutant, and Deathclaw variety. Ultimately, I think it's very interesting how the perspective of who the villain or enemy is in the various games tends to shape our thoughts about some of the in-game factions. I think it's fair to say that the main or one of the main enemies in Fallout 1 and 3 are super mutants. In Fallout 1, you're trying to defeat the Master and his army of super mutants, and in Fallout 3, the Brotherhood is protecting inhabitants of the Capital Wasteland from super mutants. It wasn't really until Fallout New Vegas, where we could befriend super mutants in Jacobstown, that coincidentally our perspective on the Brotherhood of Steel began to shift. Instead of being a more benevolent or neutral faction in the Wasteland, more negative aspects of the Brotherhood's principles were emphasized. If the Brotherhood of Steel ending ultimately did become the canonical ending, it's important to discuss and explain the atrocities they committed. Ultimately, the Brotherhood of Steel will ultimately have you kill off the railroad, which is something a lot of NPCs in the game don't like. They'll have you kill VIRGIL, and depending how you play through the game, they will ultimately manipulate Dr. Madison Lee to wipe out the Institute by basically reactivating Liberty Prime. You also have the possibility of killing Danse, who is eventually found out to be a synth, and who is ultimately somebody that is loyal to the Brotherhood of Steel's principles. At least for now, so let's talk about Danse for a moment. The general consensus that we get from the Institute is that synths are machines and that they are essentially highly advanced robots. The Brotherhood seems to agree with the Institute's viewpoint, and while Generation 3 synths are constructed with lab-grown bones and human tissue, they are essentially a more advanced version of a robot that would have been constructed with metals, various plastics, and other various materials. Robots and machines run or perform certain tasks or programs, and it's fair to say that a human or possibly even another machine are ultimately programming the synths. If synths are machines, who's to say that they couldn't be programmed to do anything? Think of it from Maxon's and the Brotherhood's perspective. The Brotherhood is at war with the Institute, and someone that happens to be a double agent could turn the tide of the war in the favor of one side or the other. While Danse is loyal as a synth to the Brotherhood cause today, would Danse continue to stay loyal? And at what point would a more nefarious saboteur personality hidden away within Dance's programming begin to ultimately reveal itself? And is it worth it to the Brotherhood to take that risk? The Institute targeted Danse for a specific reason, and keep in mind that the Institute tends to target people that have attained political status or possess significant resources. After all, the Institute replaced Mayor McDonough and Roger Warwick in addition to Danse for mostly similar reasons. Mayor McDonough in particular was used to cover up the Institute's activities and the random kidnappings, and who's to say that Paladin Danse wasn't a ploy by the Institute to topple the Brotherhood when they arrived in the Commonwealth. Let's also talk about Virgil for a moment as well. While I mentioned it previously, you don't actually have to kill Virgil provided your charisma is high enough. Now, while I think it's ultimately unlikely that the sole survivor would lie to Captain Kells, you can also retrieve the cure for Virgil and convince the Brotherhood of Steel to keep him as an asset. After all, Virgil did manage to develop a cure to reverse his FEV, and it seems like the Brotherhood might be interested in something like that. I would like to think that if the Brotherhood knew that Virgil or any person's FEV could be cured, that the Brotherhood would understand the implications of that and would want to seek out that cure and attempt to mass produce it. Think of it this way. Curing or reversing the effects of FEV could neutralize two of the Brotherhood's greatest threats, the super mutants and the Deathclaws that basically roam throughout the wasteland. Now, this would allow the Brotherhood to allocate more resources and personnel to collecting technology as opposed to killing super mutants and Deathclaws. And at this point, I think the question should shift from whether it was right to kill Virgil or not to whether the Brotherhood is actually stupid enough to kill Virgil or not. Keep in mind, too, that Captain Kells and Maxon don't know that FEV can be cured, and ultimately, while Danse disapproves of curing Virgil's FEV, if the Brotherhood had a way to neutralize super mutants and Deathclaws by curing them, they're dumb to not take advantage of that opportunity. Let's talk about Desdemona and the Railroad and how the vast majority of companions hate it when you kill off the Railroad. Now, to be honest, guys, I think it's difficult to sympathize with the Brotherhood here from a moral perspective. The Railroad is mostly helping innocent synths who are just trying to get away from the Institute, and the desire to wipe out synths because they are different from us as regular humans is bigoted, to say the least. However, the Brotherhood would ultimately argue that synths are machines, and that if artificial intelligence runs unchecked, it would ultimately become a threat to humanity. While the organizations that aid or help synths aren't necessarily bad, the Brotherhood would view them as misguided and would convince them to change their ways to align with the Brotherhood's, whether that's through persuasion via diplomacy or by force through war. In our very own modern society, there is a legitimate fear that machines and bots would ultimately replace us in many job fields. Machines and bots rarely make mistakes, and they don't have to be paid to perform various tasks. In Fallout 4, Generation 3 synths don't need to eat and will outlive humans as they don't age. Theoretically speaking, as long as they aren't exposed to radiation or other hazards like death by falling off a cliff or getting shot or something like that, Generation 3 synths would eventually outlive humans and inevitably inherit the Earth. At some point, who's to say that synths wouldn't begin to augment their human bodies, making themselves stronger, faster, and smarter than conventional humans? Then, desiring the things that other humans have, the synths ultimately wipe us out. The Brotherhood is about preserving humanity, and the development of sentient artificial intelligence is a threat to our humanity in the Brotherhood's view. As for the atrocity of wiping out innocent civilians in the Institute, I'd say that the Brotherhood wants to wipe out the Institute mostly because they're developing synths, not because they're there to kill civilians. What I do think is stupid is that the Brotherhood soldiers shoot innocent members of the Institute. After all, Madison Lee does become upset if you recruit her to help the Brotherhood, because ultimately when the Brotherhood gets to the Institute, she objects to killing of the innocent. Now, it is difficult to rationalize the killing of innocent civilians. However, more often than not, and as ugly as this truth is, war and the killing of civilians do tend to go hand in hand, especially if the innocent are in close proximity to the soldiers fighting on the front lines. And while the Minutemen and Railroad don't seem to actively pursue civilian and synth targets, sort of like the Brotherhood kind of does, blowing up the Institute does result in the deaths of countless civilians living in the Institute, both synth variety and human variety. So are the Minutemen or Railroad that much better in this this regard. The Brotherhood ultimately believe that they are starting wars with other factions for what they believe is the ultimate good, to preserve humanity as well as protect humanity from itself. Their goal is to return things to the way things once were, before the war, and to preferably right the wrongs of the Fallout universe's greedy, pre-war corporations that ultimately led to our nuclear annihilation. That leaves us with this. What would a Brotherhood victory mean for the Commonwealth? Well, the Brotherhood would have the military power to bring stability to the region. While the Minutemen and Railroad are morally superior factions, the Minutemen is too disorganized and the Railroad is too small to accomplish this task. In fact, it could be argued that the Railroad is more concerned with helping synths as opposed to helping their fellow humankind. Ultimately, while ghouls might not be liked, the Brotherhood would ultimately tolerate them while continuing to hunt down the ferals. And conversely, it's safe to say that synths would be hunted down and killed on sight. Most other humans would mostly be left alone, and maybe they would even be recruited into the Brotherhood's ranks. If the Brotherhood learns about Virgil and his FEV cure, I think they would be stupid to not spare him and try to convince him to redevelop his cure for FEV. This cure could help the Brotherhood deal with super mutants and Deathclaws without actually even fighting them, saving the Brotherhood countless resources and manpower for other things that they want to take on. The Brotherhood would wipe out the Institute, which is an organization that most people of the Commonwealth don't like or are very uneasy about. Even if the Minutemen don't agree with the Brotherhood on everything, they wouldn't mind seeing the Brotherhood defeat the Institute. The countless random abductions, the synth replacements, and other atrocities committed by the Institute would cease. The Brotherhood is also capable of defeating the various raider clans in the Commonwealth. They also might be able to defeat the Gunners, which are a faction many people in the Commonwealth also ultimately hate. And if the Brotherhood wanted, they may also be able to end whatever slave trade exists within the region as well. Ultimately, when you start to add everything up, and yes, while I will agree that killing synths because they're different is definitely wrong, make no mistake, ultimately, I think this is actually a pretty good deal for the inhabitants of the Commonwealth. I mean, basically, they're going to get rid of super mutants and Deathclaws. They're going to wipe out the Institute, which everyone hates. And if they take out the Gunners, I mean, that would also be a big win for the Commonwealth as well. Ultimately, I think we're going to have to see what happens to the Commonwealth for the next Fallout game, but if the Brotherhood ending is the canonical ending, that could leave us in an interesting place for the next game. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you guys leave a like on this video, I will totally, no joke, give you guys the brand new iPhone 9 that came out in the year 2030. I've got about 10,000 iPhone 9s down at my warehouse in Pompano. All you guys have to do to get one is to leave a like and comment on this video, follow my Twitter, like my tweets, and then if you guys do all that, you might just be able to get the iPhone 9 Galaxy XGL BFG QTE 9000 harmonic modulator. All you need to know is that it's better than the feeling that you get while walking away from an explosion in slow motion. All jokes and silliness aside, take care and I'll see y'all next time.